Janine Miller, and this is Pieces of Victory. My show is to exploit what goes on in residential programs such as boot camps for kids, wilderness camps, conversion therapies, rehabilitation programs, and you get the idea. I am a survivor myself of a lockdown reform school located in Ramona, California. Today we have on our show Joe Potosi. He is not a survivor of a residential program, but he is a survivor of child abuse. It does coincide with my show because usually 9 times out of 10, there's abuse going on in a home, and then parents decide to take their child to these camps instead of dealing with the situation. It is a whole family dynamic. Joe Potosi is an author of a soon-to-be #1 bestseller. It is called When the Dust Settled, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. He is the ambassador in Wisconsin for NASCA.org. That stands for National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse. He is also volunteering his time for the YMCA as well as the YWCA. Please welcome to the show, Joe Potosi. Why don't you go ahead, Joe, and welcome to the show. It's an honor for you to be on the show, and I appreciate you being brave enough to tell your story.
Janine, I want to thank you for this opportunity. It's a privilege, and I'm really humbled by this opportunity, to be quite honest. As Janine said, I wrote the book, When the Dust Settled, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And before I kind of share my story, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I live in Dubuque, Iowa. I work at a local university. I'm a published author, motivational speaker, and I'm an ambassador for NASCA, National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse. I believe in giving back to the community. I volunteer for the YMCA in Dubuque. I was one of the assistant coaches for 5th and 6th grade basketball, and I just love trying to make a difference in people's lives, in particular children.
Oh.
And they're our future, right? And I just gravitate toward that population because many of those young boys and girls don't have that structure at home that we all wish, that we had when we were kids. I don't know if you remember, Janine, the Brady Bunch.
Yes, I do. I go back that far.
And how I remember how, like, the boys' bedrooms were so cool, and they had all those cool little decorations. And me and my kid brothers wanted to be so much like the guys on the Brady Bunch, Greg and I can't remember the other names, Bobby.
That gives away my age.
Mine too. But, that family had its issues, but at the end of every episode, things were resolved, right? Same can be said for, like, Leave It to Beaver, so on and so forth. We live in a different time today, and if I can just share this statistic, in 2014, there was a study done, and there was 750,000 cases of domestic violence, of cases reported.
Oh my God.
And when you think of domestic violence, people automatically assume it's wife or the girlfriend being beaten by the boyfriend or the husband. But people seem to forget that a lot of times that involves kids as well.
Exactly.
Or the father isn't there, he's incarcerated, or he just picks up and leaves. And these children are raised without any direction and guidance. Not saying that single mothers don't do a fine job, they do. But it's a broken home.
And I would like to go over, if I can interject real quick, I'm so sorry. I would like to say to the audience that domestic violence could be either the male or the female. And then also, I want to point out, even if the child is not being beat or hit or involved in that, they are involved in that. Just watching domestic violence, just watching that and hearing it or being afraid of it, they're in that household, and that is still considered abuse.
That's a very, very good point, Janine. And I was abused, and I'm going to talk about that in more detail. But those injuries I sustained healed, right? But the emotional scars, psychological things that was was brought on as a result, I carried that for a lot of years, right? There's an adage: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. But that is so false, because when you say something to somebody out of disdain or hatred, it burns.
Emotional abuse,
Yeah,
psychological damage.
yeah,
And a lot of people don't realize emotional abuse is just as bad as physical abuse. And it's like an old recording in your head that just doesn't go away. And it can cause damage. And
absolutely.
whether or not you're dealing with it in a positive way or not, the point is that the damage is there. It's almost like a virus on your hard drive that just won't go away. It's there, but it's how you cope with it.
Right. So before I start, I want to throw this thought out to yourself and to the audience, and that is, your condition does not have to be your conclusion. And if I could take the liberty to use this coronavirus situation we're under right now, that's the condition we all are living under. Some of us may have it. Some of us maybe are quarantined, or we're being forced to stay at home. Whatever the case is, that's our condition, right? But that doesn't have to be our conclusion. What I mean is, maybe you have a job and they laid you off because the place where you work had to close its doors temporarily. So now you have to file for unemployment. And, maybe you get depressed about the whole situation. And a couple months down the road, there's a callback, and maybe you don't get that call, right? You can either stay in that funk, stay depressed, have a pity party, woe always me, or you can lace up your boots, put your boots on, lace them up, and go about the business of being that husband, the father, that provider, and look for a different job. Oftentimes, a lot of people stay stuck, you know. Maybe they had a job that it was a dream job, they were there for years. They now are unemployed, and it's a spiral, and they spiral out of control to the point where they become homeless, helpless, maybe an alcoholic or a drug addict. They lose everything because they have this state of mind that, you know, there's no hope.
Right. And it's hope that gets us through it all. And you're absolutely right. We're the captain of our own ship. We may not have been in control before as a child, but we have control now. And we can do something about it. We may not have control over our circumstance, but we can use it to our advantage, or we can crawl into a hole. It's our choice. Yeah. We have choices now. What a great analogy that was with the coronavirus.
Thank you. Thank you. So if I could, I'd like to kind of share some of my story.
Please do.
So I was about 3.5. At this time in my life, it was my mother, my father, my sister. My mom just had my first brother, Marty. And we moved out of this very dilapidated apartment into a housing project that was relatively new, right? And once we got moved in, all these what I like to call no account people. I mean, they didn't work. They sat around and drank alcohol all the time and smoked weed. They would congregate at our house all the time.
Oh, wow.
And they would get drunk with my folks, and All the while, me and my sister were taking care of my baby brother. And excuse me, we were both under the age of 5.
Oh my goodness.
And back in those days, there was cloth diapers. My mom attempted to teach both of us how to put the pen through the diaper and, pin it closed. But I really struggled with that. And my mother didn't have the patience with me. My sister just kind of took over and taught me. And me and my sister just tag teamed and just took care of the baby all the time. We became like the parents. And my mom was just so preoccupied with drinking, as was my father. But they began to get into a lot of arguments and disagreements that escalated. And there was one time, and this story is in a book, that my dad was like 6 foot, or I'm sorry, my dad was like 5'10", maybe 5'9", and he was extremely handsome, well built, and my mom's 4'11". Um, I'll never forget this time. She attacked him physically. And instead of my dad, grabbing her or hitting her or any of those types of things, he just tried to cover up. He became like a punching bag.
Oh
And,
no.
and it was right after that he left. And this one particular guy named Tyrone, who, now I need to mention before I get to that.
And that is still domestic violence right there. I just want to point that out. Like I said before, it doesn't matter if it's the male or the female. It's still domestic violence, no matter what.
And although my sister was 13 months my senior, I always looked up to her. And when those type of situations would arise, like my mom and dad fighting, I would always follow her lead because we were both scared, right? But my sister always had that leadership quality as a little kid. I mean, take the initiative to, go somewhere and hide so that we wouldn't be hurt, or the baby wouldn't be hurt, etc.
So she was hiding both you and Marty, correct?
Yes.
She would hide both you and Marty, and so she was the mother. She was the mother, really. And you were acting as a father at 5, taking care of Marty with your sister.
Yes.
Your sister's name is Toots, correct? That's the pseudonym you use for her. Oh, it's Toots. Okay.
Yes. And by the way, Janine, the book is dedicated to my sister.
Oh, that's very sweet.
Because not only is she my sister, she's my hero.
Oh.
And so, I mean, and I'll talk more about just how wonderful she was and is today. So, my dad's out of the picture. And now, to give you a backstory, this man, Tyrone, befriended my dad, and he used that as a cover to kind of get in with my mother, right? And so, obviously, Tyrone knew me. He knew my sister, right, when he would come over. I never liked the guy. 6'5". He always wore these really dark shades. So you really had to look really hard to see his eyes. It was like he was hiding something all the time. That's the opinion I had, even as a young kid.
It was your intuition.
Yes. There was something shady about this guy, right? My dad left, and the same day, this guy moves in. And in short order, before my dad left, I don't know if anyone out there has ever heard of Irish twins, but at least this is what my mother has told me. Irish twins are when you have a child or children 11 months apart. That's called Irish twins. And that's what my mother had Marty. And 2 months later, she became pregnant again by my father. So she was carrying around my brother Greg in the womb all this time when she was drinking and smoking weed. And when my dad left, my brother Greg was still in the womb. He never, my dad never laid eyes on his youngest son up until this point. So my stepdad comes on the scene, and the partying intensified. Um, but he became very mean toward my mom. And when they would get into an argument, I guess she thought she could talk to him like she talked to my dad and kind of try to bully him. And he over the years, he broke her jaw, he broke her collarbone,
My God.
and he kicked her
And
in the.
where were you when this was going on? Were you watching it? Were you hiding? Was it both?
It was both. When he would attack her, there'd be other men in the room. Me and my sister would hightail it out of there with our kid brothers and hide.
Oh.
But we would watch the action from a safe distance and but we would shield our kid brothers from what was taking place. And my kid brothers, like Greg is just an infant. Marty is like, a year old. They were crying because they knew something was wrong. And what resonated with me was, although, I tried to cover my eyes or close my eyes so I didn't have to see it, I could not block out the noise, the screams.
Sure. That's awful.
Yeah.
That's awful.
So, because my stepdad knew who I was a reminder to him of my dad. After all, I looked like my dad, I acted like my dad, I talked like my dad. I would ask when my dad's coming back. And my stepdad is a black man. A black man and a white woman in the 70s was really not accepted, by many people.
I remember that. I was around during the racial integration, and I remember that. I remember the tension going on.
Well, speaking of tension, Janine, my extended family, now I can't say all of them, but there was a few that were extremely racist. And they let it be known that they don't want nothing to do with us based on the fact that he was a black man. But over time, so we had a biracial, a mixed race couple. They were alcoholics, druggies. There was the physical abuse he inflicted on her, and he began to abuse us.
It's terrible.
He would tell me all the time how much he hated me, and they wanted to get rid of me.
That's terrible.
Yes. Oftentimes when he would beat my mother, she in turn, usually she would be drunk when he would beat her. They both would be intoxicated. She in turn would blame it on me and my sister, and blame me and say everything was my fault. The fact that my dad abandoned the family was my fault. The fact that we have no food was my fault. The fact that she's being beaten by him was my fault. Why? Because he hated me. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I just said that's awful, and I was going to say, be a parent. Stop taking any of your mishaps out on your children. It's just wrong. You were being a parent, and you shouldn't have been. You were taking care of Marty. You were taking care of Greg. Your sister was taking care of you. You were neglected by parents that should have been parents. In addition to all of that, now you're going to lay on responsibility. It's just wrong all the way around, and abusive, and the list will go on. But go on with your story, Joe.
So at this point, we're living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and my stepdad didn't work, but my mom did from time to time, as I recall. Second shift. There was a rec center or community center in the projects they used to let us go to from time to time, or they let us play outside with the other kids. And the other kids knew there was something wrong. There was something going on with the family, but it was like you didn't talk about it. And as it turns out, a lot of these other kids also were from broken homes, right? And it was just the way it was. That's how life was. But we would bond together. And I didn't mention this to you before in our talks. A lot of people say they love music, but for me, growing up in the 70s and 80s, music was more than just music. I mean, I didn't have anything. We didn't have anything, but I had music. And a lot of the music I listened to was relatable because they sang about stuff that I was going through, and that meant something to me. And I was able to escape to a different place. I used to dream I could fly, right? And at this point, I'm in school now. My mom had another son to my stepdad. Um, I remember in second grade, every night I'm longing for my father. I used to dream he would come into the house. He would sneak in and lay in the bed with me and just talk to me. But I would dream I could fly. I would fly to Dubuque, Iowa, where he's from, his hometown, and I would spend the whole night with him and fly back in the morning before school. I mean, that's just how much I missed him, and how much I longed for him to be in my life, our lives. Obviously, at this stage, it didn't happen. In the projects, if you can imagine, there's a stigma on people that live in the projects, right? There's a lot of drugs, prostitution, and there's a lot of gang members, really hardcore dudes. I mean, there was some really hardcore dudes. But my stepfather he was the baddest of them all, and no one ever messed with us. None of those other young punks around the neighborhood, because they knew he was our stepdad, and they didn't want to deal with him, right?
And there were
And
some
he would,
pros and cons to that. No one messed with you, but at the same token, you needed someone to report child abuse and domestic violence. And you were in a catch-22, pretty much. I mean, no one was going to report it because they were so afraid of him, but yet he was almost like a protection from the outside home, right? Because you were
that's
in
exactly
projects. Okay, so this is not a nice neighborhood. You're in the projects. I can only
right.
imagine. So he was a protection for you, so to speak. He wasn't protecting anything inside the home. He was protecting everything from coming inside the home. But what was going on inside the home was a tornado.
You are exactly right. He
Created
would
by
all he would often say, "I made sure no one ever hurt you or put their hands on you." And I'd always think, no, nobody in the neighborhood messes us. The only people that hurt us, the only person that hurts us is you.
exactly.
And my mom, of course. And the reason people look the other way or whatnot is because, yeah, there was social services. Of course, there was the police, but there's an unwritten rule in that culture. You don't you don't turn people in. You don't snitch. It's something you don't do. On top of that, they're all afraid of him. I remember one time. Now we lived in two different apartments in the projects. The first apartment was a two-bedroom, and we moved into a four-bedroom. But by this time my mother had six children. She had two sons to my stepdad. I never forget his mother lived in the projects right across from us, and
Can I
the
interject
police
real
called.
quick? She
Go
had
ahead.
two sons from the stepfather. How were they treated? I'm just curious. How were they treated? The
They were
same?
treated. No, they were treated like pets. They were treated much better.
Much better.
And my brother Marty, my father's son Marty, the third child, he was a pet too. He didn't face the wrath of my mom or my stepdad like I did or like my sister did.
You were singled out.
Yes, I was.
You and your sister Toots were singled out.
And my brother Greg.
And Greg. Okay. That's terrible.
Um, I remember the cops were called, and I don't know why they were called. All I remember seeing, and his mother lived in the projects right across the street from us. All I remember seeing is my stepdad fighting like 4 or 5 cops in the front yard, and he was winning. And I was just like, why can't somebody stop this guy?
Oh my God.
He never got arrested.
Wow.
I mean, I could not. The man was 6'5", and he was a big dude. And when I see now, I'm like, man, this is real. This is getting really scary. While in second grade, I started to struggle and with my classwork and whatnot. And I used to rush to school because there I felt safe. I wasn't beaten. I was not going to be locked in a room.
Welcome back to Pieces of Victory, the author of a soon to be #1 bestseller, When the Dust Settled, Between a Rock and a Hard Place. And we're going to let him continue his story on domestic violence that went on inside his home. And he was being neglected, he was being beat, he was witnessing domestic violence. You name it, he's been through it. Emotional, psychological damage that this has caused him. Go ahead, Joe, go ahead and continue your story, or if you want to add anything.
Sure, thank you. From the onset of our time together, I mentioned to you how this has been an honor and a privilege. And as you know, I've been hoping to have this opportunity for some time, but life gets in the way. We get busy with our lives and our schedules and whatnot. But I feel I need to say this. I've had a fair number of podcasts up to this point, and 95% of the people I've um, interviewed with are also survivors. And we had, a common purpose, and we're all on the same page and like a brotherhood, so to speak. But what I've experienced the short time with you, Janine, is I feel even more comfortable. And I joke about I'm a man of few words, but the opposite is true, really. But I feel more at ease, and I feel like, as you yourself are a survivor, there's a connection there, and I can that's the only way I can explain it. So if
Well, the
anyone ever,
feeling is definitely mutual. I feel very comfortable with you, and it makes the interview so much easier. It's so much easier to work with when you have that comfort level between two people, and it's a trust, and you're more willing to share your experience when you are trusting the person that you're working with, and it does work both ways. So I appreciate you too. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story. And let's just go ahead and recap on where you left off in your story. Your stepdad was beating up your mother. You were being a parent. You were taking care of Marty. You were taking care of Greg. Your sister was taking care of you. And the parents weren't being parents. And it's
no.
a shame.
So my mother, as I mentioned before, she was just as abusive as my stepfather. And practically every day, I would hear from one or both of them that I was worthless, I was a piece of garbage,
Terrible.
and just like my father. And
Unacceptable.
looking back now, I think because I was kind of like I was the oldest boy, and my 4 youngest brothers never knew. Well, his two youngest sons never laid eyes on him um, when they were like infants or toddlers, right? It wasn't until they were older. Me and my sister knew who our father was, and I guess I was the outspoken one, wanting my dad back in my life, back in our lives, and it didn't sit well with either one of them. So a pattern developed. By this time, in the summers, we were allowed to go to Dubuque, Iowa, where my mother and father are both from, and it's about 85 to 90 miles away from Rockford, Illinois. So when I was real young, they would take us up there. They would drive us up there and drop us off. And for whatever reason, they would always take me to my dad's parents' house. And they would take my other siblings to my mom's side of the family. But I was okay with that because I knew there was a slim chance I could possibly see my father, right?
And also the environment was better too. The environment was what, 180-degree turnaround. It was with
Yeah,
your grandma, right? Grandma.
yes.
Okay.
I'll put it to you this way. My grandma's house was my safe place.
Oh,
My grandfather was my hero. And they had a little white dog named Sissy. It was a miniature Samoyed. And behind their house, they had all these woods and uh, limestone cliffs. Me and the dog would go exploring. We found all these like little caves, and I was just in heaven. And when I would go back to the house for dinner or lunch or whatever the case was, um, I never, it never crossed my mind that they were going to berate me or for getting dirty or they were going to,
you could breathe. You could breathe.
right. I could be a little
You weren't
boy.
on guard 24 hours a day in the middle of a war waiting for a bomb to go off.
Right. You know, it's kind of funny now, but my grandparents like to watch Hee Haw and Lawrence Welk. And
Lawrence Welk. I remember Lawrence Welk.
yeah, on Saturday nights, they would watch those programs, and I would be in the living room with them on the floor. They had all these little plastic army men, and I would play army and for hours, you know. And it was simple things in life that I just cherished, you know. Well, during one of those visits, I got to see my dad.
Uh-huh.
His sister Grace got in touch with him. He came to Dubuque, and my cousins brought my sister and my his two youngest sons over to my grandparents, so he got to see all of us together. And he was acting kind of indifferent toward my two youngest brothers, and I found that really odd and strange. Yeah, he didn't develop a relationship with them, but they're still his kids, right?
Right.
I'd have to say I was probably the closest one to him, you know. And I remember he was in a movie called there was a movie called Fist, Fist, with Sylvester Stallone. It was filmed in Dubuque, Iowa. He was an extra, you know. He was like a cop or a security guard in this movie, and that's all everybody talked about that whole summer, you know. Your dad is like a star, da da da. But that doesn't change the fact that he was still absentee dad. You see, when our time on vacation was over, it was time for me to go back to Rockford. It was time to pay the piper, so to speak. And what I mean is that time I was with my grandparents and my dad, I would tell them that my stepdad throws me around like a football, that he's beaten my mom mercilessly. So he would beat her into a bloody pulp. And, you
And what was
know,
their reaction? How did they react?
they seemed shocked and not maybe not totally
Did they try to
surprised.
comfort you? Did they say everything's going to be okay? Did grandma say, hey, let's adopt you? What was going on there?
Yeah,
You
my
know,
grandma,
you into the house as a safe haven?
I
Anything?
pleaded, yeah, I pleaded with my grandparents to not make me leave. I
Oh,
plead, I, I laid on the floor and just cried. I didn't want to go back. Right?
that's heart-wrenching. I would know right away something is not right when a child is crying because they're afraid to go back home. That's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, my uncle Henry, I'd seen him recently, and he was kind of rehashing some memories of when I was a little kid. And at my grandma's house, there was like a loft, and that's where there was a few beds. That's where his bed was. That's where I slept. And oftentimes he would come home, 7 or 8 o'clock at night. It wasn't quite dark yet, but I was up there getting ready for bed, saying my prayers with my grandma. Then she would go downstairs, and I would just lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, and apparently my Uncle Henry was concerned about that, but he wasn't that concerned because he didn't ask me what's going on, or he didn't ask me what can I do to help or
Right.
whatever, you know.
It was
And
almost like they turned a blind eye towards this situation.
exactly, my
And
whole entire family, my
awful.
whole entire family.
And then how
So
do you enjoy yourself in this safe haven? Now you have anxiety about going back,
right, back into the trenches,
right?
as I called it. You know, some people may say, "Well, where was your dad all this time? Was he paying child support? Was he paying visits to the his children on a regular basis?" No. What my dad was, he was living in a rescue mission somewhere in the Midwest. He would literally catch freight trains to get to where he wanted to go. He would live at a rescue mission, work for a day labor to make some money to get drunk. How my aunt Grace got in touch with him all those multiple times, I would never know.
Oh, wow.
But that was his backstory, right? That's I guess how he was trying to cope with everything that happened to him. I don't know. Um, and it's really sad and really tragic. So I cried out for help to my extended family, my grandparents. I cried out to help in the school. Um, that didn't help. So then,
Let's back up here for a second. You cried out for help in the school. Did you tell a teacher? Did you tell a principal? Who did you confide in? And what was the reaction? Did you turn
okay.
it on? What happened?
So I'll never forget my second grade teacher was Miss Cush, and my attention span started to drop off. My quality of work. She said she found me daydreaming a lot, or kind of like I was there physically, but I wasn't really there.
Not focused because you're thinking about the abuse that's going on in your house.
Right. So I remember she talked to me one time, and she walked into the office, and she talked to the lady at the desk. I don't know who she was, secretary, a principal. I don't know, but she she put me in her car, and we drove to my parents' house, and she she suspected a lot of different things. But when we got to the house was really clean, and they lied through their teeth, and they told her what she wanted to hear, and she threatened to get in touch with social services if she was alarmed by anything. Well, they fooled her, and when she left,
Let's just clarify with the audience on what you conveyed to the teacher. You told her about the domestic violence. You told her about being malnourished. You told her about being beat. You went
yeah.
into detail. Okay.
So before we went to the office, she asked me, well, she just said, how's it going? What's been going on? And I just started crying, and I said, nobody loves me.
Oh,
I'm afraid to go home. I said, my stepdad and mom fight all the time, and he beats her up really bad. He locks us in the basement every day. And I said, he's really mean to me, and he beats me often, as well as my mom. And they drink all the time. And I said, I'm just really scared. I'm scared for me, my sister, and brothers.
sure.
Now, only in second grade, I felt like I was my kid brother's protector. And I took beatings for my kid brothers.
God, that's awful.
When something would happen and my stepdad would, want an answer, I would protect my younger brothers and take a beating for them.
Oh my God.
I would take the rap. You know why? because I want some type of normalcy. I don't want them to be subjected to what I had been
Oh,
subjected to.
that's so
You know?
sad.
Yeah. Now it didn't happen all the time like that
But it doesn't
because
matter. It doesn't matter.
right.
Once is enough. Once is enough.
So Miss Cush, she was so sweet, and just so she was like a mother hen. She
Oh,
nowadays you wouldn't see a teacher taking a kid in the car. That's a big no-no, right? But back then in those days,
right.
things were different.
The sky was the limit.
She
Back
just it was only a few short blocks away. And after that whole episode, when she left, um, I got beat by my stepdad with
then.
the wooden paddle that he loved to
Oh,
use. He made me strip naked, he had me go to the basement.
that is so degrading. That is awful. Strip naked in front of your other siblings too, or
Yeah, should have them watch around, gather around. And
so
my
you were made to
mother,
be an example for the other children that you are going to get stripped naked and you're going to be beat in front of the whole family. And you were the example. If you snitch, if you tell social services, if you tell a teacher, this is what happens. So you were the example. And it's
yes,
awful. And where did he learn that from, I wonder? Where did he learn to strip a child down? I wonder if that happened. I'm only speculating, but I'm wondering if that's how he was raised in his household. I wonder what went on in his home.
you were
But
very,
needless to say, it doesn't matter. You don't repeat a pattern.
you're very intuitive. I discovered years later that my stepfather, my mother, and my dad all had extremely traumatic childhoods. But
Doesn't
as you just said, that doesn't give anyone a right to do what they did.
no, because we're the captain of our own ship. We have choices. You can choose to be
So
a good parent, or you can use that as a guideline to
right,
what not to do to your child.
absolutely. So in those times when I would get a beating, it wasn't a spanking, it was a beating. He would be behind me, pacing back and forth, talking about his perceived disappointment in whatever I said or did or whatever. And at the top of the stairs would be my mother blocking my escape
Oh my God.
with fury in her eyes, smoking the cancer stick. If looks could kill, right? I was a dead man, so to speak.
That's
And
abuse right there. Even if she didn't hit you, let's just say she didn't, but we know her history. She did. Just doing that, contributing, even if she didn't even block you, not reporting what he's doing is
right,
abuse. She's part of the abuse. She's an abuse.
exactly
She's guilty
right.
because she's allowing it to happen.
And there was oftentimes me and Marty and Greg would get in trouble, and we all would get whoopings at the same time. We all were stripped naked, and we waited our turn. When we got several years older, the stripping naked stuff kind of went away, but that was the only plus. I mean, I used to try to wear 2 and 3 pair of pants for padding, and he would catch on to that, and I would get extra licks, as he called it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
Awful. Did you ever
my
did you ever try to run away?
I did, me and my brother Greg, and I'll get to that
And
momentarily.
okay.